That's right, it's true. Just like a lot of you Avatar The Last Airbender fans, I hate The Legend of Korra. And let me clarify, I'm talking about the show as a whole, not the character herself. I am not misogynistic or homophobic. I promise, at the best of my ability, I am not one of those things. We all know Avatar Korra is not exactly one of the most well-received avatars in the entire fandom, but guess what? We all know good and well that we kind of have to live with her. Especially when the upcoming series, with the new series coming out with the new earthbending avatar, and of course with the new movie coming out soon with the animated adult versions of our OG Team Avatar. With all of those announcements, and we're getting that new movie very soon, I felt like this was the best time to do this video because I've been contemplating it for a long time. I think it's now time that I bring back my rewrite series once again. Hello you beautiful monkeys, it's your boy Kadukun, and today we're going to attempt to rewrite the story of The Legend of Korra. Before I decide to start clowning on The Legend of Korra, let me actually give it some of its positive. It was an ambitious series where it was supposed to be the predecessor of our elegant and more well-received series Avatar The Last Airbender, where everything was thematically well made perfectly, while The Legend of Korra kinda faltered, but it still had a lot of those compelling ideas. And yes, as much as it may be true that a lot of the story beats in The Legend of Korra wasn't exactly well received, the core issue lies in the story structure. Unlike Avatar The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra was kind of being renewed by a season by season basis. Avatar was actually conceived to have a 3-arc story, when The Legend of Korra was constantly being renewed by a note-to-note basis. I don't know the full details of what was happening behind the scenes, but all I know is that Nickelodeon had a very high control over whether or not The Legend of Korra was going to continue, and the creators were creating each season with the implication and thinking that that season was going to be their final season. In fact, The Legend of Korra was never really meant to be a full-length 4-season show. It was meant to be kind of like a mini-series. So essentially, each season was written as it may have been the last, resulting in 4 arcs that feel emotionally and philosophically disconnected, with character development constantly resetting, character arcs being incomplete, and conflicts escalating and resolving abnormally quickly, and villains presenting powerful ideas that you feel like would have a long-term effect, but their ideas rarely ever carry over forward into future seasons. So the point of this rewrite is not exactly to rewrite everything that's already there. The point is essentially to take what already is there and realign it to actually make a lot more sense, and take some of the changes that I have in mind to realign with the existing material. But before I delve into the seasons and the plot itself, I actually want to talk about the characters alone from an individual basis, because I believe there are some things about each character that should have been shifted compared to the plot as well. And starting off, of course, with our girl Korra, because Korra has a lot of flaws. Now granted, a lot of people might say, oh, she's a very hard-headed character, she doesn't like to listen to people, she is the worst kind of avatar because of that personality. I'm telling you this right now. We all know good and well that Korra is supposed to be the carbon opposite to Aang. Aang was a lot more level-headed, childish, and one of the main things about Aang is that he would run away from the responsibilities that he had. The very core reason why the 100-Year War happened was because he ran away from the Air Nomad Temple when he found out that he was the Avatar, and then froze himself in a block of ice and let the 100-Year War happen. Korra is a very different scenario. Korra grew up knowing good and well that she is one of the new avatars and one of the strongest avatars out there. And not only that, her ego gets inflated when she's trained with the White Lotus, some of the elite benders to exist in the entire verse, and she masters earthbending, firebending, and waterbending at a very young age, I believe like 3 or 4 years old. So of course it's very natural for her to have this very boisterous and very confident personality compared to a lot of the other characters that she interacts with. And she also knows that she's the Avatar, and she knows good and well how important the Avatar is to the world. So you can't take away from the fact that she is supposed to be this arrogant and boisterous character, and doesn't help the fact that she was secluded outside of the normal world for a long time from a pseudo-voluntary position. It's at 17 years old that she basically convinces the White Lotus and her parents and the Northern Water Tribe to have her freedom and to leave the location and to enter the Republic City to learn about the world that she's trying to bring balance to, or to maintain balance for. The problem with this series when it comes to Korra's personality is that she realistically just doesn't shift outside of that arrogant personality. One of the very things that was needed to be very focused on is that her physical strength should be a compensation for her lack of spiritual awakening. She herself does not see the full value of the spiritual aspects of being the Avatar. She only cares about the physical aspects. She trains physical strength, that's why she's very buff and strong. She likes using earth bending, fire bending, because those are some of her favorite bending styles, and air bending is her least favorite because it forces her to see the actual spiritual side of the bending, because spirituality is a requirement for airbending. Therefore, when she makes a lot of mistakes in the earlier seasons and decides to kind of go against people, it is within her character. The problem is, at the halfway point, which I'll talk about later when I'm talking about the plot, realistically shows how she's going to shift her character. The problem with Korra's character is that she needs people to keep her grounded. Korra, in the grand scheme, Team Avatar in this entire series is the worst version of Team Avatar because her supporting cast literally do not know a character arc if it bit them in their left toe. So Korra realistically wouldn't need to be changed. It would need to be Mako, Bolin, and Asami. They work best when they're not stuck in this stupid, annoying relationship carousel, triangle, square, whatever you want to call it, stupidity thing that's being written by a Hallmark creator for whatever reason. Instead, they should represent the different perspectives of the changing world when they're dealing with the outside threats. So we can make Bolin the comic relief, but he is also very empathetic and open-minded to the strives of the non-benders. He understands how frustrated non-benders feels and why they feel like they're being left behind by the benders, and he is the most likely to question the very system that they utilize on a daily basis. As for Mako, he's a lot more of a cop than other characters that I will talk about later. Mako is a lot more rigid. He believes in the structure, law, and order of everything because he did not grow up with that. And he understands that it may be a necessary evil even though it may be far from perfect. And as for Asami, for the most part, I don't really care what Asami does throughout the series, but she can be somewhat of a bridge between all of the characters, so because she could be one of the more grounded characters because she can see the benefits and flaws of both sides. She benefits from the privilege of the city, being, daddy's money girl, having all these rich assets, and then is also not blind to the flaws of the system. She understands that both the power structures and the people affected by them, which makes her one of the more grounded characters in my personal opinion if that were a way to make it shift around. The only problem I have is I do not know how to give these characters their own personal arcs because Bolin, Mako, and Asami are just not that appealing enough for me to actually think of plot lines for them. Because keep in mind, when we were talking about the first Avatar series, we have individual plot lines for Katara, Sokka, Toph, and Aang, and Zuko, and Iroh, and Ozai, and Azula. 8 whole characters. We have full character arcs in that whole series. And for The Legend of Korra, we only have really Korra and the other 3 characters who don't really have those entire character arcs at all. We do not know how to actually improve upon it. The only thing I can think of is make it that maybe Mako decides to betray, quote unquote betray, Team Avatar by joining the police force, by deciding to improve on the political situations and kind of going against Bolin's viewpoint, and they kind of have this internal struggle with each other inside of the political sphere. And you could have like this conversation with all 3 of them in different points where they're dealing with the perspectives that they are trying to face against. That might be a really cool way to do it, because keep in mind, as much as people may not like the idea when I'm talking about like political viewpoints, the Legend of Korra standpoint is dealing with the integrations and decisions and the relationships between non-benders and benders is no longer about bender versus bender versus bender versus bender. It's not all four benders going against each other. It's now benders in general versus those who are non-benders. And then it progressively expands to something a lot more philosophical and grandeur, talking about how each individual character and how each individual villain and how each individual character perceives the concept of balance. But keep in mind, the Avatar is supposed to be the one that's maintaining balance. But it brings up the question that was never really brought up in the previous series: how exactly is the Avatar supposed to function if they're in a world where balance is not exactly needed? They're kind of already in a relatively quote-unquote moment of peace. Now that's all I have to say about the characters so far. Now let's actually move on to what I rewrote for each season and how the story arcs are supposed to go in my version. So similarly like in season 1, we all know the good old villain of Amon, and we're going to keep the same thing, that Amon is already in motion with his massive equalist movement and is leading it at its peak, with all of the non-benders organizing and going up against benders. Protests are turning into coordinated disruptions, and bending triads are being targeted, and making it for the first time that benders aren't the most dangerous people in one room. We keep the same thing when Korra enters a world like a walking solution. Her approach is very simple: find him on, beat him on, problem solved. Fist, fist, boom, boom, fisticuffs, all that good stuff. And of course, physically, she tries exactly that. She runs around crashing rallies, confronts equalists head on, and of course treats the movement like a villain group instead of some form of social shift in the society that she lives in now. Meanwhile, Amon avoids directly fighting early on. He controls the narrative instead: public speeches, demonstrations, and very targeted attacks that make benders look dangerous and unstable. You know, very similar to a man with a very special mustache. That was once upon a time followed by Michael Jordan. You can tell me all you want that he did it because of Charlie Chaplin, but how many of you out there are as old as me and already know about Charlie Chaplin? Like, let's be for real. So we follow the same way with Korra hunting down the evilist, hunting down Amon, and all that good stuff. And then in the mid-season, that strategy starts to pay off. Korra confronts Amon directly and of course loses, not just the fight but her bending. So in the original series, of course, she lost her bending kind of closer to the end of the season. So I would have changed it to make it where it's in the middle of the season. Let her live with the loss at that moment in time. Let it sit there and fester for a little bit of time. Let her feel the consequence of her actions. And then of course, this is where everything starts to change. So physically, Korra is removed from the conflict. She can't just fight her way back in. And mentally, she starts to spiral because her identity was built being the Avatar with the most power, being one of the strongest beings in the entire verse. So philosophically, she is forced to confront something that she's ignored for the majority of the time since the beginning of the series, is that the people that she is protecting don't trust her, and she needs to figure out why. And not only that, try and avoid making it worse with her very boisterous and arrogant and hard-headed personality. So I feel like for a section of time during that season, she'll be kind of removed from the conflict and will be focused on her training to gain airbending with Tenzin. And at the same time, her side friends like Bolin, Mako, and Asami are having their own things, but the main people that will be having something will be Bolin and Mako. Mako will probably get pulled deeper into the equalist ideology, not as a full covert, but as someone who fully understands the anger and frustrations of the non-benders, to the point that he almost decides to join the equalist movement. Maybe not becoming like a villain, but in essence he understands the movement very well. And then Mako doubles down on law enforcement, believing structure is the only way to stop the collapse of everything happening around them. To the point that they have their own internal conflicts. They're not exactly enemies, but there is some form of conflict of interest. But going back to Korra, one of the main things I wanted to focus on with her in the first season is the spirituality of the Avatar. Because we have to keep in mind, in the previous series, we get a lot of spirituality talk from Aang when he's in the beginning series and he's actually talking back to the past avatars, but we don't get any more details beyond that. We don't really get any other deep understandings of the spirits. We only get like bits and pieces of the lore, like with Ko the Face Stealer. We mainly get a lot of details from either negative spirits or neutral spirits and some of the positive ones like the dragons. So I feel like it's natural for her to actually want to learn more, especially in the backstory. She actually did go to the spirit world and meet Iroh. I think one thing that should happen is that she should have her own spiritual guide. Just like in Aang in season 1 to 2, he got a lot of leeway by leaning on to Roku. So I feel like her spiritual guide shouldn't just be Aang, but some other avatar in the past life. And I feel like the best one would be Kuruk, because for those who are unfamiliar with the backstory of the Avatar The Last Airbender and the other past lives, Kuruk was the main avatar with the main fight against the dark spirits or spirits in general, due to some of the lackluster decisions of the previous avatar Yang Chen on the spiritual side of everything of the avatar. So like in the first series, how Aang relies on Roku, I feel like she should rely on Kuruk mainly, but then she also gets appearances from other past avatars like Yang Chen and Aang. And those three would be the main ones who help guide her through her journey, because those two avatars plus Aang would be the main ones who help teach her the ways of spirituality as she goes through that season. So at the latter end of season 1, we can see that she has actively changed how she engages threats throughout the season. At the last part when she fights Amon, you can see that she unlocks airbending not because of like a Zenkai boost that she got like in a moment of desperation, but because she was acting without relying on power at all, trying to defend people, trying to protect people against the threats of Amon. Maybe Amon's whole organization decided to fall apart because of the betrayal of a certain character or anything like that. So that way it doesn't feel random when she actually unlocks airbending at the end of that season. But one thing that I didn't say earlier is that I would make Amon not a waterbender. I thought that him being a waterbender in that season kind of undermined his whole goal as being the equalist and the anti-bender movement. I would have made it that he was a chi blocker, and he knew how to take away people's bendings temporarily because of the chi blocking abilities that he learned from the techniques of Tai Li, or he advanced it in some way, something like that. So that way you could even lean into the idea that Amon's whole organization is kind of like a little bit of a sham. It's supposed to be like a propaganda machine. So that way when he actually has benders joining his side, they're supposed to be beacons for that propaganda. So he temporarily takes the bending away from people who are part of his organization, and then people like Bolin and Mako can learn about that conspiracy in the background and tells Korra about it, and then Korra gets involved in the whole debacle, hence leading to the ending fight. And at the very end, I would make it that she just doesn't get her bending styles back as soon as that season ends. I would make it simply that she has to learn and master airbending first to actually gain the value and learn the deeper depths of the other bending styles. Because in the previous series, we only knew about the history of the air nomads, their pacifist belief system, and their relations with other bending nations. We didn't get the executionary breakdown of how airbending really works from a fundamental standpoint outside of the perspective of someone who is not an air nomad. So that way, Korra is forced to be put in a position where she's actively weaker than she was in the very beginning. So she actively has to move different as the avatar in public from a social and economic and political standpoint. So that way, when she does get stronger and when physical threats do come into play, she can be seen as a trusted figure as each season goes down the line. And one of the last things for season 1 is that I would make it that Amon doesn't die. So that way he has an option to come back later for maybe a combined threat, but I'll talk about that later when I get to that point. Now, season 2. We all know good and well this is one of the more glaring examples for why The Legend of Korra was very poorly received. So I don't know if my changes would actually make it a lot more palatable, because the changes I had in my mind, I don't really know how exactly it would be perceived, but let's give it a shot. So I did really like the idea of having Korra having this very uncertain energy about herself and this unstable personality, not necessarily in terms of violence or anger, but essentially she doesn't exactly know how to move as the avatar anymore. She's very uncertain. So it makes it very obvious and understanding that when she decides to find outside counsel outside of Tenzin. So when Unalaq comes into the question and she finds her uncle and she starts getting advice from him, it actually makes sense that she decides to kind of listen to him. Goes against the very personality that she had the previous season, making it seem that she wants to listen, but she has to learn who to listen to properly. I want to make it that he doesn't oppose Korra like in the original series. He guides her, he frames her past actions as incomplete, and her full understanding of balance is very shallow. So then she decides to actually go into the spirit world, not open it up, but she goes there to train, meditate, learn to interact with all the different spirits instead of learning how to dominate with her very confident personality, while at the same time she actually starts to learn all the other elements while going backwards and forwards from Republic City to the spirit world. I feel that would be a much better way to introduce the idea of the first avatar, the dark avatar, all that good stuff, without it sounding like it's out of left field. And slowly but surely she regains her confidence while maintaining some more introspection in her personality. But there is still a level of uncertainty. So philosophically she starts leaning towards the idea that balance might require less human control, not more. And then she's trying to find a way to make it work in that regard. Then in the middle of the season, that's when everything starts to shift and Unalaq reveals his true goal, which is not power, but removing the Avatar's central role entirely by restoring the world where spirits and humans exist without the mediator, and he can be the ultimate ruler of all of those things. And instead of a sudden betrayal, it feels like a natural escalation of his beliefs. Hence, when he becomes a Dark Avatar, you can actually explain that he's been going to the spirit world as well, and he actually decides to become one with Vaatu over time, just like Hawan was with Rava. So over time, he becomes a Dark Avatar a lot easier. And throughout everything, just like in the last season when Aang was trying to get as much information as she could from all the past avatars and all the people that she knows personally, trying to figure out what she should do against Unalaq. So then we have a scene where Korra dives into the past lives and she talks to a lot of past avatars, even ones that we may not have heard of before, and they give their inputs about why, whether or not if she should keep the spirits and the humans separate or together. And then you could have the ones who believe it should be separate, could be Kuruk, Aang, and Yang Chen, and then you could have someone like Kyoshi, Roku, or some other avatar that she doesn't know about, believes that the world of the humans and the spirits can live one with each other. So instead, she kind of has an inverse moment compared to Aang that he had in the last season, where all of the avatars are telling him, hey, you need to kill the Fire Lord. Well, in Korra's case, she is in a moment of pure uncertainty, because she can't just rely entirely on her confidence. So at the end of the season, I chose to maintain that she still opens the spirit portals, not because she is sure that she is right, but because she believes forcing separation is worse, but that lingering feeling of uncertainty still remains. So physically, Korra stabilizes the merging worlds rather than winning the fight, and mentally she accepts she doesn't fully understand what she's done, and philosophically she embraces responsibility over certainty. And instead of her trying to lock away the dark spirit, just put the merged version, the dark avatar, into the forever tree and lock him away. So when Unalaq dies, you're forced to actually deal with the dark avatar again, so that way you can have like a lingering threat in the background for something else, but he doesn't have to come back anytime soon. It could be a cool thing. Instead of having her lose the fight and lose all the avatar past life in such a way that you feel like she should have won that fight in a landslide. So then the season ends with something a little bit bittersweet, like Unalaq is defeated and trapped away, but she doesn't know what's going to happen in the next arc because she doesn't know what consequences are going to come because of it. And then we go to season 3, where season 3 actually starts putting out new energies, and then the new airbenders start to appear, and the world is starting to shift. Systems are destabilizing, and this time there is no mystery about it. This is of course Korra's doing, and of course now people who are non-benders who are turning into airbenders have this conflict of interest about whether they believe or not they should be given this ability. And the villains of this season could be Zahir, and not just Zahir, but we can have a return of Amon. So in this season, she's leaning very heavily into the relationships between the humans and the Avatar a lot more, the political sides of everything. I would probably make it that compared to the last 2 seasons, there is a build of trust for her because of the defeat of the major threats like Amon and Unalaq, but that trust is put into question again because of the rebirth of the airbenders in random people who are just starting to learn how to airbend randomly. And they bring the question of whether or not the Avatar should have the control of changing the biology of everyone and combining all of this spiritual energy all across the world. And because of this, it brings forth the birth of Zahir and the Red Lotus, which embody their unintended consequences because of their opening of the spirit portals. And of course, their philosophy of radical freedom challenges the very idea of centralized authority, including the Avatar. So Zahir's critique is not without merit. He argues the systems of power inevitably lead to oppression, and the true balance can only exist in the absence of control, meaning he has to take out all of those who have these hierarchical levels of power, like the Earth Kingdom King, the Avatar, etc. So obviously when Korra gets captured and kidnapped by Zahir and Amon and the Red Lotus, because I believe Amon would actually align with Zahir pretty closely, but I would believe that Amon might get betrayed by Zahir because their ideologies are just a little bit different amongst each other, making it clear that Amon has some form of moral compass outside of Zahir, because Zahir's ideology is a little bit more extreme. And at this point, I would also make it that Korra actually has a little bit deeper understanding of how the bending styles work and the spirituality behind them, because I'll make it at the end of season 2 that she actually gets her bending abilities back, all 4 bending styles, but they're at their surface level, and then in the next season, the 3rd season, she's trying to learn an in-depth understanding of them, so she gets better teachers in the spirit world and in the real world and combines the bending styles in different ways. And in fact, I would actually make it that she actually learns an extra bending style like metal bending or another new bending style that hasn't been introduced yet. So it would be cool to have this thing where Zahir and Amon and Korra are kind of fighting against each other, and it's a confrontation that's both physical and philosophical. Korra can't just simply overpower him because his ideas can't be defeated through just strength alone, and not only that, his ideologies are spreading to others amongst the Red Lotus and other people who might even agree with him, and spreading the influence of Amon as well, having a lot of these factions going against each other where you have this imbalance of power with all these different people gaining bending styles with benders and non-benders. I would make it that the imbalance of power between non-benders and benders reaches its absolute peak in this season, to the point that this would probably be Korra's very first official loss, and it would be the most public one and the most vicious one, because basically at this point, yes, in the past 2 seasons I would make it that she would win against Amon and she would win against Unalaq. But Zahir's influence is so strong that he doesn't just have the Red Lotus, but he has a group of airbenders who go against Korra, and she essentially gets jumped because she doesn't want to hurt these people unnecessarily. So when she loses, it's personal and public to the people, showing that the Avatar can actually be beaten by, lowly individuals, but mainly because they don't know about the fact that Zahir is actually just jumping around, taking all these airbenders and jumping the Avatar. It takes like an overwhelming force, and he wants to re-emphasize the physiology of their abilities to be free from the control, quote-unquote control, of the Avatar. And then later on, when she actually goes on her training arc and actually regains the abilities and gets a deeper understanding of the spirituality that they're going through, she comes back, defeats Zahir, and re-emphasizes that she is not here to control anyone. She's only here to keep people safe, all people alike, non-benders and benders alike. And then she brings up the question of whether or not if she should keep the spirit portals open or closed. Now we are at the final season. After everything, all of the spirits, anarchists, people aren't debating philosophy anymore. All of the basis, all of the framework is now there. They're done. They want stability, structure, something that doesn't fall apart every 6 months. And Kuvira understands that better than anyone in this season. So she rises not as a conqueror but as a solution. She unites the Earth Kingdom with precision, restores infrastructure, enforces laws, and creates something that the world hasn't had in a while, which is predictability. At the very start of the season, Korra would still be recovering from the past season because, I probably wouldn't put her in a wheelchair, but she's still recovering. She's a little bit traumatized. But when Kuvira decides to surface, Korra does something that she hasn't done ever since the very beginning of the series. She decides to take a step back and focus on something else, so that way, when everyone else starts to try and calm Kuvira down, she actually can have a better solution when she actually does face Kuvira. In essence, Korra decides to address the problem at the root, the instability that she helped create. So she reconnects with the Air Nation not as a leader but as an ally, not someone leading them around. She works with Tenzin and the new airbenders to stabilize affected regions, physically calming spirits' disturbances rather than fighting them, doing all she can to regain the trust of all people, even those who are the new airbenders, because they are just as scared and confused. And Bolin and Mako would take more active roles on opposite ends of the conflict. So I feel like Mako will be working with Kuvira's growing systems, seeing firsthand how order can become control, while Bolin encounters the Red Lotus remnants and see how easily freedom turns into destruction. So yeah, that's one thing I would do in this season. I would make it that the entirety of the Red Lotus was not destroyed in the last season. I would make it that some of them survived. I would make it that maybe Zahir was captured like in the last season, but some of them that were killed did not die. They probably just got dismembered. And Asami becomes essential in rebuilding infrastructure in areas affected by the spirit instability, growing the story in something tangible. So people trying to live their lives in a world that won't stop shifting because of the spirit energies and all the spirits around them. And through all of it, Korra starts to understand something that she didn't before. The problem isn't just Kuvira, it isn't just the Red Lotus, it's the imbalance between control and chaos, something that she unintentionally amplified when she opened the spirit portals. So midway through the season, that realization leads to her most difficult conclusion. The portals need to be closed. And it's not because that spirits are the enemy, and it's not because humans are the enemy either. It's because these two worlds were never meant to be bridged together. They have completely different cultures, completely different ways of working, and they are not meant to work together. And if there is a point in time they were to work together, today is not the day. Humans and spirits are meant to be separate, and if they were to work together, now is not the time. There's too much instability. So closing the portals wouldn't exactly be a victory, it would be a correction of a mistake. And then the final act will just bring everything together. So Kuvira pushes forward with full control, attempting to stabilize the world through force, even as the environment itself becomes more volatile, using the spirit energy to create her mechs and all that kind of stuff. I personally wouldn't use the giant mechs, I'll just make it that she makes new weapons instead of just the giant mech battles, because I was not a big fan of that. And at the same time, the Red Lotus remnants escalate their actions, targeting both Kuvira and Korra, trying to collapse what's left of structured society. The climax isn't just one battle, but it's a convergence of everything all together. Korra has to face both ideologies at once. Physically, this would be her most balanced fight in the series. She's not overwhelmed, she's not desperate, she's controlled, precise, and deliberate with all of her actions. She has a much better and stabilized mindset, especially she constantly talks to the other past lives and other spirits and Tenzin throughout the series up to this point, with her getting all of her guidance from her master, essentially her spirit master, Korra. Korra will redirect Kuvira's force instead of meeting it head on like she would do in the beginning of the series, and neutralizes the Red Lotus without feeding into their chaos. Mentally, she doesn't hesitate anymore, and philosophically, she finally understands her role, not as someone who chooses a side, but as someone who prevents either extreme from taking over at any point in time. Instead of a massive spectacle, it's something quieter but heavy in impact. Korra makes the decision to close them, fully aware of what it means. She's undoing her biggest choice, admitting that she was wrong, not completely, but enough. And more importantly, accepting that balance isn't something you can fix once, it's something you maintain. And of course, I would make it that the series would end on a more grounded and reflective note. Kuvira is defeated, not destroyed, but forced to confront the limits of control. And at the end of it all, I think this would be a good series that would end with Korra not ending up in a relationship. Because frankly, it's not the same of when Aang and Katara met each other. For Korra was a lot more messy, so it's very hard for me to figure out how she can relate to a lot of these characters and start having this lovey-dovey thing, and it makes sense. I feel like it made more sense to have her quote-unquote team avatar be someone like her, Tenzin, and the family behind that, and not really Mako, Bolin, and Asami, because the found family trope wouldn't exactly work in this environment. So I would like to make it that she ends not necessarily with somebody else, but with the people that she loves, all of her friends, but she fully and finally understands who she is, what she is, and what her role in the world is, and it's a lot more reflective, and it can end with her rejecting a relationship with one or two of the characters. It could be with Mako or Asami or whoever, because I feel like that would make sense with her character personally. It would lead into the quiet moments, rebuilding, reflection, everything along those lines. Korra standing not as a symbol above the world, but as someone within it, at peace, not because everything is perfect, but because she finally knows what she is supposed to do as the Avatar. And I didn't know where to put this in the video, so I'm just gonna say it here. One of the major changes I would make in The Legend of Korra is that don't make Toph become a cop. I did not like that whatsoever because I feel like that was a betrayal to her character. Based on how people saw her as being weak because of her disability, she did not believe in the fact that people would use earthbending as some form of way to police how people freed themselves, or using their abilities to control other people's freedoms. I feel like what would make a lot more sense is that she started using her earthbending abilities to do a earthbending school, because that did happen in the comics, and she starts teaching a bunch of earthbenders to become one of the best earthbenders out there. But on top of that, because of those teachings, people turned it into one of the modern policings in that series. And when she learns of that, she decides to reject it, shut down the school, and then go live in the swamp. Because that makes a lot more sense to me. Instead of her actually spending a whole bunch of years actually trying to do this whole policing thing, because it just doesn't fit her character whatsoever, personally. And yeah, that's my scuffed version of how I would rewrite The Legend of Korra. There are so many things in this story that I would have changed, and there's so much lore that could have shifted. Let me know in the comments what you guys would have shifted, because I wanted to do a general idea of how I would change things. And on top of that, I feel like there would have been a lot of things I could have improved in this series, even if it was being heavily controlled by the studios. But either way, you know, I had fun trying to write out and try to figure out how I would change things in The Legend of Korra. But yeah, I think that's everything I have to say right now. If you really enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like. It helps my videos as well. And also don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I upload videos every week. And yeah, that's everything I gotta say. It's your boy Kadukun. I'll see you guys next time, and peace.
FMA, handle business, don't play. On point when it comes to the anime. Jack and Daxter, ayy, let's go. The ultimate heroes, don't stop, we on the road. Kadukun. Yeah, welcome to the channel.